We'll start the meeting at 8:32, and members of the public are welcome to address the board on subjects both on and off the agenda. The public comment on individual agenda items will be allowed at the time the agenda item is discussed and is limited to 3 minutes per person. Let's see. Sarah, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Judy, roll call, please.
Mr. Kelly is absent. Ms. Cavanis?
Here.
Mr. Jurdy?
Here.
Mr. Cromer?
Here.
Mr. Shoemaker is also absent. Ms. Harris is absent. Mr. Swope?
Here.
Ms. Pierce?
Here.
Mr. Land?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, first we have the consent agenda. All matters of the consent agenda are to be approved by one action without discussion unless a board member requires separate action on a specific item. Does any trustee wish to pull an item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved by unanimous consent. Next, we're going to the Historical Benefit Review Project Status Report. Director Rentschler.
Thank you, Chair Cavanis. The report for October is in your meeting materials. We've completed 5 additional corrections and are quickly dwindling down on those that can be worked on until we get the compliance statement from the Internal Revenue Service. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address any questions you have at that point.
Seeing none, is there any public comment?
There is no public comment.
Okay, moving on to Internal Audit Program Discussion, Executive Director Rentschler.
Thank you, Chair Cavanis. This item is a follow-up to the entity-wide risk assessment that was completed earlier this year. As previously mentioned, that can be the basis for developing an internal audit function for MSERA. We're requesting board direction here on whether to proceed with developing an audit program, and if so, whether to use an agreed upon procedures engagement or an internal audit engagement. The memo explains the differences between those two, and I'll go into that if you request. The audit committee would also participate with addressing the audit plan scope of work that would be issued in the RFP for services, and it may require an update to the audit committee charter, so there would be direction to bring that back if there's desire to move forward. So as far as the type of engagement, an audit is an assurance engagement where the auditor actually issues an opinion. And agreed upon procedures, the auditor doesn't issue an opinion, they're just providing findings of fact. So with that, MSERA's intent is to use this internally to confirm that we're following all of our policies, procedures, rules, and regulations, and then to make improvements on those based on any findings of the auditor. So the recommendation is to engage for a agreed upon procedures engagement with an external audit firm. And I'd be happy to address any questions you may have regarding this at that time.
Sarah? Oh, Lenord.
The mute. Oh, good. I'm on. There is two versions of the Red Book. A sort of Reader's Digest version of the Red Book, and then there's the full Red Book. Which would you think that we would be using?
I really don't have that much experience as a CPA. You know, I'm not a CPA, and the audit function, that would be a question to address with the RFP or with the audit firm. I don't know the distinction between the red books, but I'm assuming that they would use the one that is appropriate for the type of engagement. There's also a yellow book. I don't know the distinction between a red book and a yellow book.
The red book is for, the issuing body is the internal auditor, some certified body there. The abbreviated version is what they consider the essentials, as opposed to the extra for the full red book.
Actually, let me back that up. Because this is not truly an internal audit function, the audit standards would not be the yellow book or the red book. It would be using the, what is it, the AI?
Agreed procedures, or, I mean.
Yeah, the same as our external financial auditor uses. It's the same standard. That's my understanding based on discussions with the consultant who assisted us with the risk assessment. Yes?
So we would continue with the external auditors annually, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
this one would just be in addition to?
Correct. There's no change to our financial audit.
Okay.
That's required by law, and we issue that, we include their opinion in our issued published financial statements in the ACFR. This has no change or effect on that engagement, and that would continue as is. Now, because they do work for us currently, we could not contract with that firm if we were actually wanting an internal audit, which would require them to issue an opinion. However, they can serve in an engagement for agreed upon procedures. So they would be welcome to respond to the RFP if we issue one for that, whereas they would not be able to if we actually went for a full internal audit that was externally provided.
Trustee Jardy?
Yeah, I think we all have some familiarity with audits. I'm looking to Director Pierce is probably the most knowledgeable about audits, so I'm hoping that you might still have some follow-up questions. But if I am understanding this correctly, the internal audit, the distinction is that it's really looking at whether or not MSARA is, on a practical matter, following its existing procedures as defined, so that we don't, I mean, just to give an example, hopefully 5 years, 10 years down the road, a future board, future staff do not discover that practices, procedures were not properly followed, and there's, let's say, some new unfunded liability that's discovered 5, 10 years down the road. Is that kind of the simple description of why you would do an internal audit?
It is considered best practices. With that, I should say that if we use an agreed upon procedures engagement, it is beyond just our financial audit. Our financial audit looks primarily at our financial statements and does a little bit of review of internal controls, whereas these agreed upon procedures, we can take specific practices that we have, whether it's we want to audit member accounts or we want to verify calculations of final average salary or whatever it is, not strictly related to our financial statements or internal control, and they would review our practices to make sure it aligns with any policies of MSARA, that it aligns with the law. So yes, it's to ensure that our operations are compliant with all regulatory rules.
Okay, because where mistakes can be made today, or there's certain areas where mistakes today essentially aren't going to be made because computers, calculations should be correct. Presumably.
We are in a better position now with,
Yeah.
we have a pension software, et cetera.
Yeah, but I guess there's still the opportunity potentially of some manual error in either data entry potentially, or just maybe just not following a procedure that the law requires, but maybe it's someone's understanding of what the procedure was, but their understanding may have been incorrect. And so this kind of an internal audit might hopefully identify that, wait a second, what you think is the rule is not actually the rule. Stop doing that. Do it this way.
Yeah, it could be that someone's interpretation of a policy or regulation in the serial was not interpreted in the same same manner as the auditor would, and that would bring something to our attention, allow us to get a legal opinion on that, but to update our practices in case someone's process isn't following the policies or the law. So yes, the goal is that it would improve our internal practices to ensure that we're in a strong footing as far as compliance with regards to pretty much any aspect within MSARA's operations.
Okay, and then there's the report on page 3 has a couple different sections where it talks about costs. One is the $100,000 to $130,000 range. The other one's $40,000 to $60,000. Are these? Can you just sort of go through the options here, and are these annual costs? Or these?
They are annual costs, and the cost certainly is highly dependent on the scope of work, the sample size, what we want to have reviewed. As we identified that and, let's say, issued an RFP, then when we got responses back, it would include a cost estimate for each specific item. Let's say we chose 3 items to do and agreed upon procedures. We would be specifying the procedure that we want to look at. Maybe there's an area that historically had caused concern, or that for some reason we just want confirmation that our practices are in line with our policies and the law. So those agreed upon procedures, the cost is going to be much less than a true internal audit, because the auditor is not expressing an opinion which they would have liability for. With the agreed upon procedures, they're just providing us findings of fact. If they find things that were not calculated correctly, or they have recommendations of best practices to incorporate those types of items. So a full internal audit, that auditor is expressing an opinion that they would have some liability for, and it is more expensive than doing the agreed upon procedures. Whereas MSARA would have more say in which procedures get reviewed. If you're truly doing an internal audit, the auditor gets to select what they decide to look at. Similar to our financial audits, we provide them a variety of information. They also do a little bit of a review of our retired membership or our active membership with confirmations, etc. But they select what they're going to include in each year's audit. We don't have any input on that, whereas with an agreed upon procedure, we could provide direction on to specific areas that we would like reviewed.
Okay, and then finally, would this scope of work possibly be maybe a little more intensive in the first couple of years, and then maybe the most probable areas of potential concern might get addressed in the first 2 or 3 years, and then the scope of work might potentially go down over time? I mean, maybe laws change, so it's not like you'd probably want to just end this practice. I mean, court rulings change, laws change, so there's probably always something to look at, but I'm just wondering if you think that the scope of work might decline over time, because in the first several years you've hopefully identified the principal areas of potential concern.
Well, that certainly would be a decision of the audit committee. Utilizing the risk assessment and working with our consultant who assisted us there in developing an audit plan, then the committee could decide these are the ones that we think are highest risk, or where we have the most interest due to volume or whatever criteria they want to apply. And then they could go back and periodically revisit those in the future. But so it really would be dependent upon the wish of that committee as to how frequently something is reviewed and the scope of it. But certainly the number of procedures reviewed and the scope and the sample size would greatly impact the cost. So if there's desire to contain the cost, you could certainly look at doing fewer procedure reviews or containing perhaps a smaller sample size. So I know my answer is not necessarily yes or no, because it is dependent on the makeup of that committee and their feelings on proceeding with the program.
Are you able to reach out to your counterparts at the CIRLs and get sample audit agreed-on procedures?
I have talked to numerous serial systems regarding this, two that follow a similar process to ours and don't have a truly formal, full internal audit division. Like Lacera is so large that they do their own internal audits. But I did speak with two systems that are using an approach similar to this, where they're engaging with a CPA to do agreed-upon procedures, and got examples of what they were looking at and what they went out to RFP for. So yes, I have. There's a number of serial systems that don't formally have a program in place for internal audit, but they rely upon the review of their financial audit once a year. And there's a couple of systems that are considering starting a program, but have not progressed to the same point where we are yet.
Discussion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
to be clear, your opinion as the executive director is the AUP is probably more appropriate for our organization?
That's correct. At this point, I would recommend a UAP engagement. That was after multiple discussions with our consultant who assisted with the entity-wide risk assessment, and our intention on using the information gleaned from that process. An internal audit would be more appropriate if we were going to provide assurances to other stakeholders, county members, citizens, because those audit reports could be released similar to our financial audit report. But this is really an internal process as far as what's been laid out here to help us improve and kind of establish a baseline of where we are right now with some of our processes.
And are there service providers that you're aware of from talking to these other serial systems that specialize in retirement associations as a CPA to provide the AUP services?
The two systems that I spoke to that contract externally for a UAP engagement, both are using their current financial auditor to do that, because the financial auditor already has some exposure to the entity. They're already fairly well known within the pension arena. So both of those individuals are already working with business that they had an existing relationship with. Yes?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that we just did an RFP for the county-wide financial audit, and the responses were very limited. There's just not that many companies that provide the audits, and I would imagine not as many that are specific to serial.
There's a few firms that have relationships with a number of the serial systems. Of course, one of the largest in the serial realm is the company out of Bakersfield, Brown Armstrong, who is our financial auditor. And certainly because they're in California and they're familiar with our serial regulations, it gives them, some advantage in evaluating an RFP when you're searching for a financial auditor. For a retirement system, the county's process, involves so many other departments and is certainly much broader. And I realize that historically, I think they used CLA most recently. And CLA used to have a specific pension arm, but a lot of those folks left and started a new pension-related focused auditing company.
But as you said to begin this, if we followed the AUP procedure, our financial auditor would be welcome to apply during an RFP process, but they would not if it was an internal audit.
That's
form.
correct.
Understood.
Any more discussion on this item? Is there any public comment on the item?
There is no public comment.
Do we have a motion? Direction? Okay.
Regarding the three items at the top of the memo, we're looking for direction on whether to proceed with developing some sort of audit function. If so, whether to use the agreed upon procedures engagement or an actual internal audit engagement. Staff's recommendation is for an agreed-upon procedures engagement. Also, if the decision is to move forward, we're asking for direction to the audit committee to work with staff and our consultant to develop the audit plan and scope of work and to issue the RFP and to review proposals and select finalists for the board consideration. And then, of course, if so, and we're proceeding with that, we would like direction to bring back an updated audit committee charter to include duties associated with the internal audit function.
I would like to motion that we move forward with the agreed-on procedures. And then the others, would that be relevant? Or if we just do the AUP, that the other 2 points?
We would want direction from the board to cover all 3 of those points specifically. So if, what type of audit function, if so desired, it would be an AUP, and then directing the committee to work with us on development of the scope, and then to bring back the audit committee charter. So it would be direction on all 3 of those items.
I would like to include the motion to direct the audit committee to work with the staff and then come back with the appropriate input, feedback.
Second?
It's just actually direction. It doesn't need a motion or a second. So can we change that to direction instead of a motion?
Yes.
Thank you, Trustee Swope. And is there any other feedback from the board, or is the board have consensus on the direction provided?
Trustee Jardy?
Yeah, I support it. I do have a follow-up question, though. Could you remind us who is on the audit committee and what is the time frame? I mean, I won't be on the board at the end of the calendar year, so I'm not clear if I am on the audit committee, if this would be concluded before the end of the calendar year.
That is a question that I'm hoping Judy can answer, because I don't recall who's on the committee right now. I believe there's 3 members.
I know I am. I believe it's Jerry.
Jerry and
I am.
Sarah and Catherine. So you're not on the committee currently.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, wait, there were 4, and he is the 4th member. Ah, I lied.
Yeah,
You-
he is the 4th
And-
member. But remember, we'll be following the assignments and the board chair and vice chair in December. We'll be making those determinations again in December.
The intention is, if we move forward, to have the engagement start with next fiscal year. That gives us time to define the scope in the audit plan, issue the RFP, select a vendor, and not do anything further the remainder of this fiscal year, except those items I just mentioned.
Confirming you mean fiscal year, not calendar year?
Correct. I am
Okay.
referring to fiscal year. The engagement would start with July 1 of 25.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item number 4, investment matters. Financial investment officer.
Trustees, you have before you the monthly investment report. I'd like to call out a few things. On page 2, you can see the weights of the portfolio, as well as a small pull for cash for monthly benefits. And then on page 3 and 4, you can see some of the monthly returns. And if you look into the second column there, fiscal year to date, those are going to be a preview of the quarterly return. So overall, it was a good month, 1.82% for the month and 5.86% year to date. There was quite a rally. Small caps have outperformed large caps over the quarter. Again, we'll see that in next month's report. Yields declined. The Fed cut rates. Quarterly GDP was reported to be 3%. So it's been a good quarter, as you can see, a 5.8% return. If the trustees have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah, everything's done pretty well, so we'll get into a little more detail next month's meeting.
Is there any discussion or any more comments? Is there any public comment?
There is none.
Okay, so moving on to number 5, quarterly board work plan and strategic calendar, Director Ren.
Thank you, Chair Cavness. The quarterly board strategic work plan is included. It's been updated for some completion dates, a couple of items that are on today's agenda for board consideration. Also is the rolling calendar. I've added some information at the bottom of the rolling calendar regarding upcoming educational items. Chris Ailman, former CIO from CalSTRS, was originally scheduled to be here today, but he had a conflict arise, and he'll be rescheduled for sometime during the first quarter of 2025. We do have some benchmarking education coming up, I believe, at next month's meeting. And in January, we have Arrowmark Partners talking about regulatory capital relief. If you have any questions regarding the strategic calendar or the work plan, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at that now.
Okay, is there any public comment?
There is none.
Thank you. Moving on to succession plan policy, Director Ren.
Thank you, Chair Cavness. This item is being brought back from last month to incorporate the amended language suggested at last month's meeting. So the only deviation from the request was that it was added to item 2 in the guidelines as opposed to item 3 where it was discussed at last month's meeting. The new item is that 2E, the executive director or RFIO will immediately communicate with the chair or the full board when a succession event occurs or becomes known. Prompt notice of the succession event will permit the board to address organizational needs in a timely fashion. Everything else in the policy is the same. That was the only addition. This one does require a motion. We're asking for the board to adopt the policy as presented or as further amended by the board.
Any discussion? Is there any public comment?
There is no public comment.
Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I move we adopt the policy as presented with the amendments of the dates on each page of September 18th and on the last page of when it's adopted.
My apologies.
Is there a second? Trustee Swoop. Okay, we have a roll call vote. Wait, excuse me. Is there any public comment before we go forward?
There is no public comment. May I confirm who made the second motion?
Trustee Swope.
Thank you.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Cavness?
Yes?
Mr. Jurdy?
Yes?
Mr. Cromer?
Aye.
Mr. Swope?
Aye.
Ms. Pierce?
Yes.
And Mr. Land?
Aye.
Approved.
Okay, SACRS Matters, Director Rentschler.
Thank you, Chair Cavness. The full business packet for the fall SACRS meeting is not available. However, they did provide information on the item that will be the primary voting item. And so there is direction requested on this to the SACRS delegate for the fall conference regarding how to vote on the SACRS legislative platform. That was item 7B in your materials. So the SACRS Legislative Committee has developed a legislative packet for consideration, and at the fall conference, the systems will vote whether or not to support the legislative platform as presented in the packet. They're asking for some minor changes to several sections of the serial. It's mostly just cleanup items. If you have any questions regarding the legislative platform, I'd be happy to answer that. The other item is just an announcement. It doesn't require any action of the board that the SACRS nominating committee will be accepting nominations to serve on the SACRS Board of Directions for fiscal year 2025, 2026. And that process will actually start in January with the deadline to submit a nomination as of March 1st of 2025. If you have any questions regarding that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
So on the legislative platform, one item is a new definition in state law of how to calculate the employee's highest 36 months of service if they had less than 36 months of service. So since someone can't be vested if they have less than 5 years of total service, I know that could be with multiple agencies. I'm trying to understand how you could have, how you would not have more than 36 months of service even if it was at more than one agency.
Because if we do a reciprocal calculation, let's say we are the last and highest paid one, we don't look at any of the salary of the other jurisdiction. We have to calculate those independently, and then the highest of the final average salaries is used. It also addresses, let's say, a service-connected disability, although that's 50% of salary, so I take that back. But it would calculate what that final average salary was that the 50% is based on. So there are not very often that this comes up, and this is really to align it to make it consistent with some other provisions in the law. So when there's an absence, the pensionable compensation, there's two changes to section 31462. 05. The first one was addressing leave of absence and how to determine compensation during periods of leave of absence. And then also, if the member had less than 3 years of service, how to calculate the member's final average compensation. Additionally, the law allows someone who has obtained age 70 to retire regardless of vesting status. So this also could be somebody who hired on very late with the county and only has less than 5 years of service, but has reached age 70 and could retire via service.
So maybe I misunderstand this, but say someone worked at one or more other agencies prior to going to the County of Mendocino. They worked at the County of Mendocino less than 5 years, but they didn't need to because they had less than 6 months gap between their previous and the County of Mendocino, so they're linked. Why would they, are you saying right now they need to work at the County of Mendocino 3 years in order to identify their 3 years, their highest 3 years? What if their highest 3 years was at the County of Sonoma? Wouldn't their pension be based on County of Sonoma?
Each reciprocal agency calculates their own final average salary, and then the highest final average salary is used by all of the reciprocal agencies. So MSERA would have to calculate a final average salary for someone even if they had less than 3 years of service here, due to a reciprocal relationship they were retiring.
Okay, so theoretically, if they worked at Mendocino County for 1 year, Sonoma County for many more than 3, and their highest 3 years were their last 2 years at Sonoma and their last year at Mendocino.
We don't combine them. So
you don't look
Sonoma would calculate their high 3, and MSERA would have to calculate theirs based on the information we had available.
Okay, and then whichever independently was the highest 3 years, that becomes the linked amount at all.
All reciprocal agencies, that's correct.
Okay, wasn't aware of that.
Okay, do we have any further discussion? Is there any public comment?
There is
So-
none?
Okay, so this is the recommended action is board direction to MSERA voting delegate.
Correct, that's the direction we're looking for, is to provide your voting delegates, which I believe will be Mr. Land, or as the backup, Mr. Swope at the fall SACRS conference, how to vote on the legislative platform being offered up by the SACRS.
So is there any discussion on what the direction is? If there's no direction.
It would be that the board is not directing their voting delegates to vote on this. So you can vote it up, you can vote it down, you can do no action, which is the same as voting it down essentially. and I'll turn it over to the attorney. Do I have something incorrect there?
Order.
Is it
Delegate.
direction or motion? I think I had it down as direction,
Right,
but,
that's,
You could do it either way.
okay.
so, if there is no comment on this item, would the direction be to leave it up to delegate?
The
That wouldn't
board
seem-
has to provide direction to the delegate on how the delegate should vote at the conference. So for this, we would want a recommended action to be that the voting delegate votes in favor of the SACRS legislative proposal, or that the voting delegate does not vote in favor of the SACRS legislative proposal, and we're looking for just that direction or a motion to the voting delegates.
Trustee Jardy?
Based on what I read here, I would support both of these motions, or both of these proposals.
A question on the second legislative item. Does that pertain to us? I did read through there, we do have DA investigators. Do we actually qualify? Does any of our members qualify for that?
One moment.
My understanding, that's for public defender investigators.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay. I
deputy.
thought I saw district attorney investigators as
District
well.
attorney investigators are already safety members
Okay.
and have been historically.
So no, it would not pertain to us then. We're already there.
If
Or
the-
And we don't have public defender investigators to,
we do.
oh,
I believe there are some employed by the county that are public defender investigators. They've just never been considered safety members before, is my understanding.
And I
Right.
believe that if the county ever took action to identify, to adopt the serial provision that would treat the public defender investigators as safety members, that this would then apply and would be only applicable a prospective basis after the date of adoption of that, and that nothing could be done retroactively regarding their general membership being converted to safety. It would stay general.
And from reading that section, it does mention a prosecutor, but the attorneys have their own union, and I don't think have ever been designated as safety members, just their investigators have been.
right.
Now, I would just add that anytime you see the word retroactive applied to the context of pensions, it's always bad news. It's like, you know, you're basically vesting someone with a benefit that was never, the cost of it was never accounted for at the time that they were in the system. So I think it's a good practice to not make benefits retroactive, because it's going to add new cost to the plan that was not assumed into the plan.
And the law currently prohibits any retroactive adoption of benefit enhancements. So because of those issues in the past, yes.
Just to offer another opinion, I supporting both of these legislative impacts, so I would also give the direction to the voting delegate to vote yes.
Is there consensus on giving yes?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to say that the direction is to support both of those items. And also, is there any public comment?
There is none.
Okay. So that's that. Moving on to the administrative report, Director Rentschler.
Thank you, Chair Cavness. A quick construction update. A lot of work has been completed, but the completion date has been extended from October 11th out to October 25th or 28th. We do expect it to be fully wrapped up by the end of this month, including inspection from the State Department of Revenue and any punch list of outstanding items. Judy and Nora both attended Pension Gold Teaming Conference this year, and they had an opportunity to have some one-on-one time with our LRS representative to get some input on some outstanding issues. The item here of note is that one of the principal attorneys assigned to our contract with Siegel, our actuary, has retired, and there is a contract amendment to replace Paul Angelo, who is one of the two principal attorneys, and add Todd Towser. The other principal attorney currently assigned to our account, Andy Young, has not changed, neither has any of the rest of the team assigned to us. So unless the board has concerns regarding the proposal assigned to our account, I can execute that amendment to the contract just to specify that the primary actuaries are Andy and Todd as opposed to Andy and Paul.
For clarification, you were saying attorneys and then you went to actuaries.
Sorry if I said attorney, I didn't mean to. This is our actuarial firm.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on Director Rensselaer's report? Is there any public comment?
No public comment?
Okay,
Madam Chair, I believe she needs direction on the contract amendment, correct?
I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah, I think the direction should be that she can execute the amendment without further input.
It looks like there's consensus.
all right, so this meeting is adjourned, and our next board meeting is going to be Wednesday, November 20th.
I have an item for the general discussion.
I'm sorry. Yeah, general board discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask for an orientation on what to expect at the SACRS meeting when I'm going to be voting. Since I don't know what the mechanics are, perhaps somebody who's been there before can give me an orientation.
I have been there as the voting delegate. I'm happy to meet with you separately and just tell you what to sort of expect.
Okay, yeah.
I've done the same. I've been the voting delegate before,
Okay.
too.
So you both can orient me then. Great, thank you.
Is there any further discussion? And seeing none, the meeting is adjourned at 9:14.